Thank you so much, Bill and Ashok, for this fantastic enterprise application demo. Now I'd like to introduce our next guest, Florian Leibert, CEO, co-founder of Mesosphere. It's so great to have you here today, Flo.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I can't help myself, of course, to point out you are a fellow German. Perhaps tell me a little bit about your history and what brought you here.
Yeah, of course. So I got to San Francisco about 8 years ago. And I came here and originally worked at Ning, which was a leading social network at the time. And later on, I actually moved over to Twitter and worked on data infrastructure, so very related to what you're doing now and what our company is, of course, doing.
Yes.
And after Twitter, I actually joined Airbnb, where I worked on similar products, the data infrastructure products. I saw a lot of commonalities of the problems we're trying to solve, both at Ning, well, actually at all three companies, Ning, Twitter, and Airbnb. And we're trying to commercialize those efforts now, which we open sourced back in the day.
Right.
With Mesosphere now.
Okay. Yep. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's obviously a fascinating area that's both near and dear to our hearts. What were the challenges that you were trying to solve?
So what we had to do is we had to take this application that had been built over the years in a very agile way as a monolithic Ruby on Rails application, and we had to split it up into, I think nowadays it's called microservices. Back then we still called it a service-oriented architecture. And so we took out components and we had to deploy these components, right? And that ranged across all types of applications: data services, recommendation, machine learning, and data pipelines. And we had to deploy these services, and that was really difficult. It was a lot of stress for our ops team, because they had to deal with a ton of applications, a ton of different hardware specs, a ton of different software specs. And yeah, it just overwhelmed the ops team. So what we wanted to create back then at Twitter was a self-serve cloud for all developers, so that developers could just go online or onto our intranet and essentially request resources to deploy the applications they needed to deploy. And that's what we did. And we used Apache Mesos, which now is the foundation of DCOS, which is what Mesosphere is building, and which is the product that we're both integrating with Datera now in order to drive modern data lakes and modern data applications.
You went from stateless to more stateful, still container-based applications. Now you sort of had both on the same data infrastructure. Of course, stateful puts a lot more pressure on the data infrastructure itself. You kind of saw applications evolve to services and consume the data as services. So what kind of implications does that have to the data structure, infrastructure itself? How would you ideally see them absorbing application intent, so to speak, and sort of deliver just the data that they need, whenever they need it, at any scale?
So I think, for anything that involves data, latency is a real concern, right? So I think you have to do whatever really reduces latency, and with transactional applications, it's even more important. But and by the way, that's I think a big reason why the world is moving towards containers, because you don't have the hypervisor and the data path anymore, and the hypervisor. Regardless of how much optimization you do, the hypervisor introduces latency. Absolutely. And that's why now what we can do in multi-tenant environments, we can run multi-tenant environments while at the same time reducing latency, and that's super exciting. I don't think that was possible really before the containerization, before containers were part of the solution.
That's obviously matches what you do on the orchestration, on the application orchestration. It matches very nicely what we do on the data orchestration side. We have a multi-tenant platform. We are obsessing about latency slightly. And now, of course, today is a big day, because we're actually announcing a partnership between Mesosphere and Datera. We've done a pretty deep technology integration. Let me ask you from your perspective a little bit, how do you look at this? What kind of benefit do you see out of that?
What we really want to do is we want to help solve real problems for our customers, right? And a lot of them are trying to run these large data lake environments, and together with Datera, we can deliver a full solution to our customers, not just a piece of technology, but a bundled solution.
And you guys can then, when you say look at data lake or real-time data lake, that's even more, right? We're going from batch Hadoop-style processing now to a Spark, to a Kafka, to real-time interactive, right? To fast data, exactly. And so that really goes right back to you need to deliver the infrastructure underneath the data infrastructure, underneath fast as well, at any scale.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I think Datera is the company that's really leading this space right now.
So Flo, that's fantastic. In your mind, with containers, we're at Cloud 2.0, people are talking about Cloud 3.0 now, fast data you mentioned, massive orchestration. Where's this all going? What's your vision for the future here?
Yeah, so I think my vision is really closely aligned to what we're trying to accomplish at Mesosphere. What we want to create is an open layer that sits above all of the clouds, that allows you to run all of your workloads without you actually having to think about the underlying infrastructure. And that's very different than what is offered today on, let's say, Amazon Web Services, because there you're tied to a proprietary API, you're tied to their product release cycles, you're tied to the completeness that they find is enough for their product, right? And you don't have much choice in each of these cloud capabilities. So what we want to create with DCOS and through partnerships like the one we have with Datera is we want to create a set of cloud capabilities, private and hybrid. So you can start in your own data center, and you actually don't necessarily know that you're in your own data center, but you have resources. The resources are priced at a certain level, and you can just burst out into an Azure, into Amazon Web Services, into a soft layer, and run workloads for a certain price there. And you don't have to think anymore about what's the exact cloud API. I think it's really important that there's an abstraction above it, and that as a developer, you're freed from thinking about infrastructure.
So now, of course, that's a little easier for stateless workloads than for stateful workloads. Data has gravity. It is, because of the gravity, it has inertia. It's a little harder to shift it around. What's your vision for not only stateless, but perhaps also the stateful parts of the containers, let's say for IoT, where you actually do need to process massive amounts of data?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of processing will move to the edge, right? Like, I mean, I think we see this with some large turbine manufacturers, for example. They are trying to put the processing onto the edge where they get the data. You can't actually send that much data back to your main data center. And so I think it's really this idea of software-defined infrastructure becomes even more important, because you want to just be able to spin up a small cluster somewhere, right? And control it the very same way that you're controlling the cloud. Right. I think you don't want different interfaces and different APIs everywhere. You want to really have a common substrate that is layered across all of that. And yeah, I mean, shameless plug here. I mean, this is really what we're trying to do at Mesosphere.
That's great. Yes, that's what you're doing at Mesosphere, and you're focusing on multi-cloud application orchestration. But what about a multi-data cloud? What about actually orchestrating the data across all those clouds so that you can also accommodate stateful workloads, or at least a part that's stateful?
Yeah, I think what we want to do is we want to rely on partners like yourself and other vendors to come up with solutions that allow replication and seamless replication of data, so that you can actually take advantage of the processing capabilities elsewhere, right? So if you're running 2 data centers, you probably want to have your data, in most cases, the important data, replicated across both, right? And I think that should be seamless. As a developer, you don't want to think about how do I get the data from here to there. It should be a seamless experience. And I think a lot is happening. And I mean, you guys are doing a great job at really helping the data space become cloud compatible.
Right. Thank you so much, Flo. It's been such a pleasure to have you over today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now talking about Mesosphere and DCOS and data clouds, I'm thrilled to announce our next demo, which is actually an integration of DCOS and Datera. And with that, Bill and Ashok, go have at it.